Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talking to Essay Authors with me, Mdu Ntuli. Thank you for joining us. Today, I'm very excited to speak to an author who's written a book that I've been reading lately, and it had me for quite a while. And I've been very interested to speak to her about this particular book. So today, I'm talking to Susan Newham-Blake about the book As If Born to You. So I'm very excited to speak more about this book and to ask her a few questions and to unpack why she wrote this book and the stories in this book. But just to tell you a little bit about Susan before I let her speak. So Susan Newham-Blake is the author of the memoir Making Finn. She has worked as a magazine editor and journalist, writing for Marie Claire, Femina, and Women's Health, among others. And her short fiction has appeared in the anthology Just Keep Breathing and ID, where she was longlisted for the Short Story Day Africa Prize. She is currently managing director of a content marketing agency in Cape Town, where she lives with her 3 children. And then just to tell you a little bit about this book, As If Born to You, when 13-year-old Zuri begins cutting herself, psychologist Anna is called in to help. Is the trouble girl trying to relieve the tension of being Black in a predominantly white private school? And how healthy is Zuri's relationship with Helen, the white single mom who adopted her? Struggling to soften Zuri's defenses during the course of the therapy, Anna must piece together the puzzles of both Helen and her daughter, including the truth of what happened to Zuri's biological mother. But reckless, alcoholic Anna carries with her an old trauma of her own. In Susan Newham-Blake's moving novel, 2 women actually damaged by the past and its secrets discover that healing sometimes lies in unexpected places. So that's just a little bit about the book. So just to introduce Susan. Susan, welcome, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
So can you just maybe tell, in my introduction, I sort of said very little about you, but can you maybe tell people a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Yeah, I think, as we said, I live in Cape Town. I was born and raised in Johannesburg, which is also why the book is set there. I think, I don't know that you can ever become Cape Townian if you weren't born and brought up here. So I think my heart is still in Johannesburg. I've got my family still live there. My brother still lives there. So I live in Cape Town. I am a solo parent of 3 children, and I do have a full-time job working for a content agency, which I've worked for some time. And in my spare time, I like to write novels. I would like to write novels more, but they don't make as much money as one would hope. So yes, I do love writing, but I need to pay the bills.
Yes. So I wanted to ask you, so when I saw the cover or the title of the novel, As If Born to You, it first struck me as a sort of like a romantic title. And then I began to read the book, and then I discovered that, well, it's not a book about, it's not a story about romance, but there are other kinds of love that are in this book. So my first question is, why this title, and how did this title come to you?
So this title is taken very specifically from a document that you receive when you go through the adoption process, which, as you would have heard, is quite lengthy and can be quite complex and fraught. And at some point you receive a piece of paper that says that from this date, this baby or this child is yours, and they say, as if born to you. So which is quite powerful, but also not completely true. So it is not, adoption process is very different to having a biological child in many ways. So the novel, I think, is exploring some of those elements. So that title is literally lifted from that document.
Mm. And then, so Anna, who is the psychologist, is the protagonist in this novel. Did you have to, firstly, how did she come to you as this kind of character? And did you have to do research in finding out the private life or the double life of a psychologist?
So I'm always, I think we all are to some degree, but I'm interested in other people's professions and other, what other people do and what that must feel like and look like. So in the novel I'm currently writing, I'm also writing from a person who I'll never do their job, but I'm just interested in what it must be like to be that profession. So that is a profession I've always been interested in specifically. And I studied psychology at university. I majored in English and psychology. And I did have to research it, but I've also been in therapy. I've been in a therapy process myself. So I kind of have obviously been witness to how therapists work and how they operate. And yeah, I read, I can't remember the author now, but she's a psychologist and a writer who wrote about her experience as a therapist. I've read quite a few books written by therapists and their experiences being therapists. But the double life, is really just a guess. I'm presuming that, like all of us, psychologists are also human and flawed and struggle, as we all do. So that was just made up. That was just, And then the other aspects of Anna, maybe her more private life, was when I wrote this book, I had 3 young children. I think my youngest was 2. And I was very busy. I was a working mom. I had 3 kids to care for. And there was something quite escapist about this character that lived on her own, who could drink a bottle of wine a night with no kind of consequences, no children nagging her to, no responsibilities in the evenings. I think that was also kind of like sounded fabulous to me at the time that I was writing it. Yeah, yes. But obviously she's got her bigger issues that she's avoiding.
Yes, and we'll get to that because there's a lot of escapism in this story. Some of the characters find ways of escaping their reality. And that's one of the things that intrigued me, that we can all come from different backgrounds and have different lives, but sometimes the emotions that we feel are the same, even though they express themselves in different ways, but the emotion is the same. The emotion of loneliness is the same, or the emotion of trauma from childhood is the same. But I'll ask you a question about that. I just want to quickly speak about the character of Zuri.
Yes.
So Zuri represents the story of many young girls who are, in a way, moving between 2 worlds. So she's one of the world is that she's a Black young girl. So she's in a Black world. Yes. But she's in a Black world surrounded by white people.
Yes.
And then and also with a white family. But her reality is that she's a Black South African. She's treated as a Black person, even though she's in these 2 worlds. And in fact, for example, on page 109, she sort of, when she's writing in her diary, she sort of thinks about this experience of being a sort of Black-white person trapped between these 2 worlds. So she says on page 109, "One year, Mom took me to Durban for my homecoming. Another time, we went to Gold Reef City, though at lunchtime, we had an argument because I wanted ice cream instead of real food, which always makes Mom freak out. And while we were arguing, a security guard came up and asked Mom if I was bothering her. She shouted at the security man that I was her daughter. Afterwards, she was nicer to me and gave me the ice cream anyway. So my question is, how did this character of Zuri come to you? And how did you do research? Or did you do any research in finding out what such children go through who are sort of trapped in these worlds?
Yes, I mean, I think the basis of my book is that my third child is adopted. I adopted her, and she is obviously, or I mean, in this country, she is a different race to me. So I was very curious as to what her life experience would be. Being, I don't. We're not all white in my family. I have a mixed race son, and yeah, there's a whole. We're not an exclusively white family, but it's a similar thing. She is the only person with a black skin in my nuclear family, at least. So I was very curious from that perspective as to what that must be like. I did, before I went and adopted her, go through a lot of process and a lot of research, reading books about people's experiences of being adopted in this country and also abroad. Sarah Jane King, Killing Caroline. There's a whole, there's a whole lot of books that I read from the person's perspective of what it was like to be adopted. There's also a lot of Facebook support groups where children who are adopted talk about these issues. So I did a lot of research and tried to kind of get into the mind of this character. But I think as a novelist, in all with all one's characters, you are also drawing from your own life experiences, and which allows you to imagine what it must feel like. So I went to a private all-girls school myself for high school in Edenvale, and yeah, I mean, I was also I'm gay, so there's some kind of experience of feeling different, feeling like you don't fit in or you don't belong, that I could sort of draw on as well. And yeah, that age group, something about the vulnerability of teenagers, of teenage girls specifically. I felt like I was, I've got memories of those myself. And yeah, so that's kind of, the character Zuri. Obviously, when I wrote Zuri's character, my daughter was only 2. So it wasn't my daughter. It was just, this imaginary girl that was drawing on all of these elements.
And then the character of Helen, are there many similarities between you as Susan and Helen, Zuri's mom?
She was my least favorite character. So I hope not. I disliked Helen quite a lot when I wrote her.
Yes,
and maybe
she's not very likable. Even and as I was, sometimes I felt sorry for her. The way you described her, how uneasy she is, and how maybe she uses food sometimes as a way of escaping. She's overweight, and she seemed, I mean, at the end, we discover the secret of what she did.
Yes.
So maybe at the end, it makes sense as to why she's so uneasy and so uncomfortable. But she seems to love Zuri. Even though I didn't like her, she wasn't one of my favorite characters, but I felt some kind of sympathy and compassion for her because she loves this girl. She loves her daughter.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I mean, for me, Helen, I think when you adopt a child, when you inhabit certain, obviously I'm surrounded by white people, I do come across white people that make me very angry, or who are coming, and they're not necessarily always the most overtly racist white people. They can be people that just think they're better and they are trying to help. And I think there was something about that in Helen, of being this, thinking she was maybe a bit of a savior to Zuri, that I also wanted to explore. And absolutely, there might be those aspects in myself. So, or those thoughts that one sometimes has. So I was trying to dismantle this idea of these, of this kind of, middle-class white South African who has access to resources, who somehow thinks that by maybe adopting a Black child who doesn't have resources, they are doing right by that child. And I wanted to challenge that myth, which I do think is a myth, and I do think needs to be challenged. And luckily, I know a lot of white people who have adopted who are also challenging that, or who are also engaging with that, but there are definitely a lot that aren't, who need to. So didn't like Helen at all.
Yes.
Happy if you hate her.
But now that you've mentioned this kind of savior complex that some white people might have. So Anna, who's again the protagonist, she does an act of kindness. So sometimes after work, so she finishes work and then she goes to the car park, and then there's a car guard called Jackson. And so now and then Anna buys groceries for Jackson. Now I wanted to ask you, is this just an innocent act of kindness on her part, or are you making a commentary exactly about what you've just said now, that she realizes that she's a privileged white South African, and so she feels maybe some kind of white guilt and tries to compensate by being so kind to someone like Jackson?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and I do think Anna is different to Helen, for example. And I do think that there is this, this condition of white guilt, and people, and possibly less so, I suspect that this would, in a country like this, and I'm not sure, but that this would start translating across all racial groups, that once you have means, it is very difficult to live in a country surrounded by such poverty and sometimes so much suffering, without having, some kind of, without it affecting you on a human level. So whether white guilt is a product of people's humanity, or whether it's like, oh, well, I'll just, throw $20 at the car guard and I don't have to worry about it because I'm doing my duty. I'm not sure. I do think it's complex. I think there's some, impulse to try and soothe the pain of the equality in South Africa, and the fact that we do carry these burdens around with us as South Africans, the burdens of inequality. So I suspect from Anna's perspective, there is probably white guilt, but there's also probably a genuine act of kindness happening there, just from her own humanity. But obviously, as you see at the end of the novel, it's also challenged by Lola, who does maybe call her out a little bit on it. So yeah, it's complex.
And so the character of Lola, so Anna and Lola eventually become close towards the end of the novel. Why did you choose to include that character, Lola? Because she seems to be an independent. She's definitely different from Jackson, and she's very different from Grace. There's another character called Grace, who was Anna's domestic worker, or when Anna was a child, Grace was the domestic worker for her family. So, and then there's Lola, who's maybe the new Black, the successful. Why did you choose to include that character? What were you saying about that character?
So again, it wasn't that self-conscious, that I just felt like writing this character who, to me, represented all those things you've just spoken about. I wasn't even really thinking of her as being new Black. I was just thinking of her as an interesting character who happened to be Black, possibly, but who, in South Africa, it's yeah, I don't know. I mean, when I was single living on a block of flats, a block of flats. My neighbor was a mixed race woman. Maybe it came a bit from that idea, but yeah, she is obviously she has her demons like Anna does, but she's actually a lot more resolved than Anna. So in a way, she has the function of actually guiding and helping Anna to some degree. But obviously there becomes romantic feelings between them.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And then also one of the aspects of the novel that intrigued me was this aspect of escape. So,
Yeah.
so you focus on this topic of escape and self-harm as a form of escape. So Zuri harms herself as a way of escaping her reality. Anna turns to substance abuse, so she drinks a lot, and that's her way of escaping. Helen, for whatever reason, she was escaping her own demons. She chose to adopt Zuri. Are you making so what kind of commentary are you making here by including this topic of escape? Are you saying maybe that even though we're all different and we all come from different cultures and different classes and different races, but we all have a need to be accepted, to be validated, or to escape? The emotion is the same, even though it may express itself in different ways, but we all feel the same emotion.
Yes, I didn't do that consciously. I wasn't trying to make a commentary on any of that. I was just trying to write these kind of multi-dimensional complex characters. But I think you're right. I think that's exactly the truth. I think that regardless of our differences, it's hard being a human. It's tough. The emotions are the same. We might have different ways of dealing with those emotions, and some of us might be better at feeling them and sitting with them and making healthier choices, but certainly a lot of us are trying to avoid them and avoiding them through alcohol abuse and all sorts of other things we can avoid them by, which so I think that is just the human condition, that we all suffer to varying degrees and feel the same painful feelings, and not all of us, a lot of us don't try and escape that human condition. Yeah.
So also, when you started writing the novel, at the very beginning, did you know the ending? Did the ending evolve as you wrote the novel, and the characters also evolved and all of these themes evolved? Did you plan it, or did it just evolve by itself?
So I it did evolve. So I'm not a huge plotter. So I start off with the characters and a vague idea of what the story is about, but probably within the first couple of thousand words, just say the first quarter of the books, the ending came to me very clearly, and I wrote it. I actually was away for the weekend, so I hand wrote the ending down in a journal that I had with me. And I'm presuming you're talking about that quite shocking ending that we're not going to talk about.
Yes.
That scene I wrote by hand early on in the novel. It just came to me, and then the book led there. But I knew that ending was going to happen. And I know some readers are quite shocked by it and maybe wanted a gentler ending. But for me, it was the most plausible ending and the most, given what Helen had done and etc. It was the right ending, but obviously it then didn't, it left questions maybe about Zuri.
Yes, so at the end, one wonders what happens to Zuri, because it feels, so I won't reveal too much about the crime that Helen committed and then what happened, but at the end, Zuri, in a way, finds a link to her Black family. I'll put it that way.
Yes, yes.
And then now she's sort of torn And so you feel sorry for her because she's an innocent child and she just happens to be a Black. And she just happens to be torn between these two worlds. And she just happened to be adopted, in inverted commas, by
Yeah.
a white woman.
Yes.
And then so now she has to deal with the aftermath of this crime or this act that Helen committed.
Yes.
So in a way, I feel sorry for her, but I wonder what happens to her because she throughout the novel sometimes she's complaining that she's treated badly by other Black people because of her accent, and she's treated badly by other Black people because she's not able to speak Zulu. And so I feel torn. A part of me is relieved, but another part of me is worried about her, and I wonder what will happen to her.
Yes, and I think, I wrote it from a place of worry. But if you look at the novel as also an exploration of adoption in itself, and this can also translate, it doesn't have to be cross-racial adoption. I think there is, a need to know where we belong, where we fit in, who we are amongst all of us. But of course, with adoption, there is that very intense added layer of wondering where you come from, and then probably grappling with that for a large part of your life. And I suspect that to be true even in adoption cases that are not cross-racial. If you were adopted and you were white and you were adopted by white people, or you were Black and you were adopted by Black people, you would still have questions about who your biological people were, and what it would have been like being raised by them. So I think the inevitability of Zuri's condition I think that is a struggle for all adoptees, and I don't know that it's worse or better for Zuri. But it wasn't great that I left her in the situation that I left her in. It's possibly not quite as shocking, an ending in real life. But you're right that she is left with this, having to grapple, I think is the reality of children who are adopted. Who's, even if your biological father buggers off and you don't meet him until you're 20, you're going to have questions of belonging and stuff like that. So it is about that fundamentally.
Yes. But interestingly enough, Anna, by the end of the novel, so Anna also has her own demons. So she had childhood trauma and she had a very difficult relationship with her mother. And there was an incident with her sister that continues to haunt her, her sister, and also involving Grace, the domestic worker. So in a way, that situation comes to some kind of resolution for Anna. She finds some kind of peace. She doesn't feel as fearful anymore. Maybe the experience of Zuri has helped her overcome some of her fears. Maybe being with Lola and also maybe allowing some of those intimate feelings through Lola to come out has freed her in some kind. So she finds some kind of freedom. Did you intend for Anna, maybe as the protagonist, to have some kind of happy ending or liberated ending?
Yes, I think you're right. I don't know that I gained it intentionally, but that is where she does end up in a better place than where she started off. And that is through grappling with her childhood demons. I do feel like the book is also commentary. I think Zuri being adopted is obviously going to struggle with feelings of abandonment, etc. But I think Anna has equally intense feelings of abandonment by being raised by such a, possibly a neglectful, very narcissistic mother.
Yes.
Who couldn't be there for her in any way emotionally. So they kind of are on a similar path. You know, they're sort of trying to find where they belong, where they fit in. Anna, you know, is obviously, for quite obvious reasons, I think, has through in childhood maybe identified Grace and Maru as safer family for her, you know, own mother. So her domestic worker, Grace, you know, was obviously a better mother to her than maybe her own mother. And I think which is why she sort of identifies very strongly with Maru and that. So there is definitely a commentary on, what makes family. And who is your family, and it doesn't also have to be biology always. It's where you feel seen, where you feel safe, where you feel like you belong. And in many ways, I think Anna comes to terms with her childhood when she actually goes back and meets Grace and Maru. And that is what actually is a catalyst for her.
Yes, but you know, sometimes when I was reading the character of Grace, when Grace was pregnant and gave birth to Maru, and she still had to work. So as she was raising Maru, and she still had to work and do the household duties as the domestic worker, I felt sadness for those women who are in that situation where, while maybe if Anna may see Grace as a second mother, or maybe even as a better mother than her own biological mother, but Grace was doing a job. Grace has children. Grace has her own children. And it wasn't just Maru. There's another child that had to go back home and live with grandma because Grace is at work. So I sometimes think, so I thought about the lives of domestic workers and what some of these women go through. And maybe our interpretation as seeing them as warm and motherly. What is their experience on the other side?
Yes, what's Grace's take on that? Absolutely, yeah.
What would she think? Because she's at work. She constantly has to deal with Anna's mom, who's sometimes not as nice to her. And so I felt for her. So Grace, I felt a lot of compassion for her in that situation.
Yeah, because she's great. Yeah, she's almost trying to run two households in a way that, like her own home where she belongs with her own family, and then she's got this family that she has to look after, especially because the Anna's mother was so absent.
Yes. Well, but at the end, I'll just read a short passage that talks about how Anna feels by the end of the novel. So she's saying, this is on page 172. So she says, there are other ways I'm taken by surprise these days. Something has shifted inside me. There is no longer a knot of fear in my stomach. My thoughts have calmed. I am better able to connect with people outside my therapy room. And I thought that was very nice, because I think for many of us, we live with this uncomfortable feeling throughout the day. And to be able to just be calm and go through the day and have peace of mind, I think that's the most treasured kind of peace, your own peace of mind, to be able to have that. And so she achieved that. Susan, thank you.
Thank you, Mdu. It was lovely to chat to you and meet you.
Yes, this was really lovely. And I really thank you for writing this novel. I really enjoyed it. And it was about love, even though it wasn't about romantic love. There are parts that touch on romance, but it was love. It was a love about the self, how to love yourself, how to make peace with your life, so that you can get better and better, and love of family, and how important family is. That it's not just your biological family, but you can make your own family as you go through life. You can choose family for yourself.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Thank you. I'm very glad you enjoyed it. I
enjoyed it very much. So, As If Born to You by Susan Newham-Blake. Thank you, everyone, for watching.
Thank you.